Today on Isolation Nation. What are you laughing at?
Your hair?
What about my hair? Oh, I'm sorry. There's a pandemic on, and apparently I couldn't go and get my hair cut. Is it really that bad?
It's bad.
We press on. Today on the show, former Maple Leaf and Habs goaltender Ben Scrivens. Speaking of staring, Ben, what are you staring at? Ben, what are you looking at, man? That's creepy. Stop it. Also on the show today, never creepy, Mark Fraser. Both of those men on the most important issue of our time. You're laughing again. What's up?
It's so puffy.
Okay, well, let me take a look. Oh, my God. Okay, I got to do something about it. I'm going to cut my hair, and that reminds me what we got.
With K-Tel's Hair Magician, it's easy for men to look neat and smartly groomed.
Perfect, but maybe I need something a little more heavy duty. Oh my gosh, it's the Flowbee! And for those men maybe that are a little bit thinning on top.
But the babes are back.
Oh, I know what you mean, buddy. And let's face it, what could go wrong? Isn't that right, little girl?
I'm a boy.
Good for her, acknowledging that gender is fluid, right? This is Isolation Nation, and what a pleasure to welcome. I've interviewed Ben before, but it was electronic. We weren't face-to-face, which we're not now, but this feels a little bit more intimate. And Mark Fraser, who I have bumped into a number of times at TSN. Both of you guys, thanks for doing this.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us on.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, so I came clean about my hair, Ben. Is there any chance you would take that hat off and show us? Okay.
Yeah, you want to see how far back this hairline goes?
No. I don't want to poke fun at you. I just thought, and Mark, what's going on there, Mark?
I mean, I wish I had my Afro pick to truly show you.
Oh my God, that's awesome. Jimi Hendrix is back.
Some version of him, yeah.
That's great. Good to see you guys. How are you doing with the pandemic? And actually, let me talk to the camera for a second. One of the reasons why we wanted to bring these two guys on is something that I read that Ben wrote a couple of days ago that was posted on Twitter, talking about the times that we live in, talking about the importance of things that we can do. And when I say we, I guess I would put it as me and Ben as being white people. And I agreed with everything. Reached out to him. He said, sure. He said, I want to bring my buddy Mark on. And here we are, the three of us chatting. So thanks for doing this. And people might wonder why a mental health show like Isolation Nation would be talking about what I think is the biggest issue of our time. And that is, systemic racism, whether it's with police or in any other way, economic, political, social, in a million different ways. And the answer to that is, too bad. It's our show. We can talk about anything we want. And obviously the relationship between mental health and being oppressed in this world, there is a huge link there. So let's do it, guys. But one of the treats that you get from doing Isolation Nation, of course, is Sean Cullen serenading you with a song. So this is for you, Ben Scrivens. This is you, Mark Fraser. This is Sean Cullen with his ode to you guys using our theme song. Roll it, Phil.
It's a nation in isolation. It's a nation in isolation. It's a difficult situation. It's a nation in isolation. Now it's time to change the situation. Got a goalie, his name Ben Scrivens. He stopped pucks to make a living. He says it's the responsibility of all the NHLers to set the people free. Yeah, Mark Fraser, he used to fight, and now he's fighting to set things right. He's got a story he wants to tell about what it's like as a black man in the NHL. It's a nation in isolation. It's a difficult situation. It's a nation in isolation. Now it's time to put an end to discrimination. Yeah.
Yeah. once again, he absolutely hits the mark. I don't know, Mark, have you ever been in a situation where someone you went on somebody's show and they actually had a song that was dedicated to you with significant lyrics?
No, no, that's definitely the first. And I may actually request it for my ringtone. I don't know.
Oh my gosh, I that would be so cool. So just so you know, Ben, there's actually a guy in Edmonton. I went out to Edmonton to give a speech at this amazing event. I was emceeing this thing, and they had a full choir of 150 people. They had the full Edmonton Symphony Orchestra playing, and it was all about mental health. It was phenomenal. And I reached out to the guy who, John Cameron. Are you familiar with the name John Cameron? He's pretty well known in Edmonton.
I'm not, but I'm actually just recently moving back to Edmonton, so I'm hoping to get back into the network.
Okay, so he said, I sent him the song, and I said, I want to make this bigger because bigger is better because better reaches more people. So he said, you can have the choir, or we're hoping we can have the choir, like 150 people singing that. How cool will that be? So I get excited about these things. So let's start with you, Ben. A couple of years ago, you came out with a hockey mask that had schizophrenia. That you were trying to raise the profile of schizophrenia because of your studies, because of what you'd learned. And I want to know, you personally, in your background, if I asked the question, mental health or mental illness, has it played a factor in your life? Not necessarily just you, but people you care about. What would you say?
I think that answer is ever evolving, right? If you would have asked me that, and you did ask me that the last time you had me on with Wade McNeil, the answer was, I had some more distant family members, aunts and uncles and cousins who have their own struggles that they deal with. But after the advocacy work that I did while I was playing with Edmonton, while I was in Montreal, and then continue on to this day, more and more people have come forward to me who've trusted in me to share their stories, to seek advice, to say thank you for the work that I helped do, because it certainly wasn't just my own efforts. So yeah, absolutely. And I would be surprised at this juncture of where we're at in 2020 if you looked around, you, the audience, looked around and you didn't see somebody in your hemisphere or your environment that wasn't affected by mental health and mental illness in some way.
Yeah. Well said. And you should be applauded for, anybody, especially when it's, from your standpoint, it's not personal, meaning it's not like you did this because somebody that you care about or yourself have suffered from this illness. It's just a good deed. And I think those are the best ones. Mark, I know I asked you beforehand whether mental health, the idea of it resonated with you in terms of your past, and you said not really, which, I'm glad to hear that. How are you doing now with this pandemic, with the social isolation, the social distancing? A lot of people who've never experienced mental health challenges are struggling right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been quite fortunate that I don't have a past or haven't had a past struggling with mental illness. And also that, during this time in COVID and in traveling back home from Germany this year and having to quarantine, and that it's actually, I've been lucky, let's say, that I haven't had the hardest of times. I've had obviously a lot of my future plans have been very much so put on hold, but that's everyone's life right now. So as far as myself having any types of experiences that others aren't going through right now, I'm fortunate to say that I think I'm just one of the many who are just trying to just deal with the day-to-day on how to stay busy, how to stay healthy, how to continue to go outside and stay active without breaking too many laws.
Hey Ben, when you played, you've been retired for a couple of years now, right?
2 years, yeah.
Okay. It's funny not funny, but sometimes I have made that mistake a few times. And when I was asking, it was like, oh my God, you better be right. Because sometimes you say to somebody, oh, you've been retired a couple of years. And they go, no, I just finished playing in Europe. And it's like, yeah. Oh God, can I take this back? So going back, obviously not that far, locker rooms in the NHL, do you think that it was an open atmosphere with the idea of sharing mental health, that we know mental illness affects at one time 10% of the population at the very least. So, there's got to be a couple of players in most teams, and there's got to be, 100 players in the NHL. Was there the kind of environment you think that people could reach out and ask for help?
I think, it's a multifaceted question. I think that depending on the team that you played on, depends on the support that you would have. Mark and I were really fortunate to play under Dallas Eakins, who's now the coach in Anaheim. He is one of the best coaches that I ever played under. You could go to him with anything. He was like a father figure-esque in that he genuinely cared for you. And if you needed a mental health day, you had a mental health day. Kind of no questions asked. The only question was like, are you okay? Right? Not what do you like? Tell me and justify it. It was, let me help you if I can, right? Rather than leaving them in isolation. That being said, we can discuss hockey culture until we're blue in the face. I think it's heir apparent with a lot of what we're seeing in the past, let's say 6 months, right? The issues that have come out. So I don't think that hockey in particular, especially when I was playing back then, was all that open to it. A lot of tape and aspirin to it and get out there, right? But I think you have, the Robin Leonards of the world. You have Corey Hirsch's. You have...
Seems to be a pattern here, Ben.
Yeah, I was going to say Clint Malarchuk's. You have a lot of these goalies who are getting out there and who are paving the way in a lot of positive aspects, and they're clearing space so that there isn't that taboo to come forward. And Mark is still playing, so I would maybe defer to him about what he sees in present day. But 2 years ago, I would say there was progress, but as with every issue, there's still room for improvement.
Mark?
I agreed. There's very much a lot of room for improvement. The last 3 years of my career, I've been playing in Europe, and although there's a very similar hockey culture overseas, I think in general, as far as topics go, inclusivity type topics go, in my experience, I feel like the European style is actually a little bit behind. Perhaps it's just not as much on their plate as it would be here in North America. And to Ben's point, we were incredibly fortunate to have a guy like Dallas Eakins as our coach with the Marlies when we did. Dallas was a guy who very much understood not just issues like mental health, but he was also one who along with Brian Burke with the If You Can Play, You Can Play Foundation, he brought in a young 18-year-old into our locker room who represented the LGBTQ community, and he really just expressed his experiences with us in hockey and dealing with homophobic slurs and everything in a manner that they were just trying to teach us on what not to do and how to improve our own locker room culture and our own hockey culture, because we very well may have one of our own brothers experiencing these types of things. And it was that type of coaching and that type of mentorship that I think, Ben, you would agree, like not that it was necessarily an issue with us, but all 23 guys, we came together, we formed a pack, and we said, if this is all we have to do in order to support and just change our ways, then we're down to do it. And there's not, unfortunately, enough of that in the hockey community, but coaches like Dallas, as perhaps some newer and modern and forward-thinking styles are starting to surface in that culture, in the hockey culture in the leagues. I mean, eventually we'll make small strides, but it's still, there's a long, long way to go with these topics.
I want to take this now to, as I said, one of the biggest issues of our time. And if you disagree with that, throw it out there. But I imagine you don't, because I have spoken to both of you, and I know your perspective on this. But let's talk about color in the NHL, and let's talk about how maybe you're being perceived differently. Ben, do you think your life in the National Hockey League was different than Mark's because his skin is darker than yours?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. That's an open and shut case. There's no doubt about it. If I look back and think about mistakes that I made, whether that was on the ice or away from the rink, I mean, I'm not afraid to admit that, I went out and partied a little bit. I drank on nights maybe I shouldn't have. I mean, if you if you asked everybody who has ever played in the NHL anonymously, you'll get 100% response rate that they did that. So I for sure can acknowledge that I stepped out of maybe my responsibilities at times as a professional athlete. But I know that when I did, or I can look back now at when I did, and I didn't have repercussions in the same way that I believe other guys who don't look like me, who aren't as homogenous as we are. They don't face the same repercussions. They're held to a higher standard, and without like having done anything to require them to uphold more.
Okay, Mark, your perspective on it, looking through your own life experience. Now, you've never lived as a white man before, so it's not like you can compare it to that. But, you've been in that culture. You have dear friends in that culture like Ben. How do you think it's been different for you, if you believe it's been different for you, than somebody like Ben?
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely been different. There's probably a lot of circumstances in which it has, but I think for me and my experiences and those of a lot of the other Black players I know that I've spoken to about this over our careers, I think a lot of it comes down to a decision. When there's a decision between perhaps two players, whether that's players to who you want to bring in as a free agent, players who you might want to call up, players who you may want to send down, or in Ben's example, a player who perhaps is going to get punished for something that they may have done, perhaps getting caught past curfew or drinking the night before a game or something. I feel like in my experiences in the game of hockey, from looking different, a lot of the times there's this resorting back into like what we know, what we're comfortable with. And the unfortunate reality for Black players in the NHL is you're not exactly what the community knows. You're not exactly what the community is most comfortable with. So when these decisions are made in whatever manner it may be, and not just in a managerial sense, but in all types of decisions made in our day-to-day lives as athletes, there's almost this inherent decision-making where we can all be boys. I can be a good character guy, a well-liked person in the entire organization, not just in the room, but there's always this sort of compete, or they're always sort of measuring against yourself against your peers. It's like, am I enough of? Am I making them comfortable enough being around me, or me being around them, or do I have to continue to adjust myself? And I've spoken about in the past. I felt there's many ways I felt I had to censor myself being in a locker room or being in the hockey culture. And I mean, you guys, Ben knows, you guys would know, like, I'm not a thug. I'm not a gangster. My mom's I'm a biracial guy. My mom's an educator. And my dad's a provincial court judge. On paper, I think like character, it looks damn good. But, if I were to come in with, I would never ever wear my tiny little diamond earrings in the locker room because of how it may be perceived. I would, never want to come in with sleeves of tattoos because of how it may be perceived. But there's a lot of guys with sleeves of tattoos. They just don't happen to look like me, because I would never want to give that type of image that I'm not one of these guys, because I don't want to have to deal with the repercussion simply for the color of my skin, or being painted in a different image.
Wow, that's quite the answer. And also, I feel like I'm being educated here, because how could I know about the culture of the locker room? Because I've never been in the locker room when the door was closed with players, and that's where life, that's when it gets really real. But I'm wondering whether you would agree with this, and Ben, you can weigh in as well, that the kind of people talk about racism, for instance, in pro sports or in the NHL, and they look at individuals and they say, has anyone ever used the N-word when you were in a corner? But to me, that kind of racism you can deal with, because it's there. You go, oh my God, that guy's a racist. But it's where no one admits to it. It's when there's no obvious signs of it that you really have to worry, because you just aren't sure how you're being perceived.
Absolutely. And so in my experiences, there haven't been any, overtly N-words being dropped in the middle of a battle or anything like that. But it's just in other experiences. When Washington Capitals are going to the Stanley Cup Finals, and there's a huge media scrum in the locker room because everyone's paying attention now, Devontae Smith-Pelly is the only person to be asked, if you win the Stanley Cup, will you go to the White House? Given at the time, the current state of America, the Golden State Warriors and the Philadelphia Eagles had their White House invites revoked because black athletes on those teams were saying, we're not going to go because we're not supporting who's in office. Now, sure, it makes sense to ask Devo because he's the black guy on the team. But why not ask the other guys? Because now you have to consider that question solely being targeted to that one guy is now forcing him to walk around the rest of the day, go on the ice for practice, the rest of the series even. He has to now consider what is the repercussions if I go from the black community that's largely represented in Washington, D.C., or if I don't go, what are the repercussions perhaps on my organization or my superiors may put on me for not supporting that cause? So it's just, it's not an overtly racist thing, but the point is when these things are targeted solely at the one minority in the group, that minority now has this on his conscience that this is something I have to deal with now, and I got to actually consider and think about. We're not a single other person in the locker room has to deal with that, and not a single other person in the locker room is either aware that he's now carrying that burden on his shoulders of, man, if I go, are my teammates? If I don't go, are my teammates gonna be happy with me? But if I do go, is the community of people I represent in this city gonna be upset with me? And those are the types of things that there's just that might not be, that's not necessarily an example of racism, but it's an example of why was it only him that was targeted? Because the issue of why people are not going to the White House right now is beyond just being black.
Right. Don't answer right away because that would embarrass me. Would you go to the White House? Wait for it. Ben, I'm talking to you. I wouldn't ask him. I want to know, from your standpoint, would you go to the White House now? I think I know the answer to that. And it's not so much would you go now, but I'm talking about the climate that exists in the United States, which is the thing that drew me to you in the first place.
Short answer, no, I don't think I would. I think I would exercise my rights. This is a really interesting discussion to have, though, because you have a guy in Tim Thomas who refused to go to the White House when President Obama was in office, and he was vilified for exercising his rights, right? I think I would do the same thing because I have opposing views to, I think, a lot of what Tim stands for. But there is a mirror to be held up between those two to analyze and say, are we treating everybody the same based off of their actions? And you can have a discussion about the underlying reasoning behind somebody's decision not to go. But this is not a hypothetical either. And I'll use some names here, but when I went back to Edmonton after the year that I was the starter, they had just fired the general manager, and they brought in Steve Chiarelli, who was the general manager for Boston during Tim Thomas's refusal to go to the White House. And I was asked point blank, and I think it's because of my outspokenness the previous year about mental health issues, about marching in pride parades that I'd done twice already. I was asked point blank, like, are you going to be this type of person? Am I going to have to deal with another Tim Thomas situation with you? And so you have these things that are brought up, and they're being held against you. And again, that is as a white player who is marching for LGBTQ inclusion, which is, we have Pride Tape now, we have Hockey is for Everyone as like an outreach program. You have mental health. I mean, that was my extreme activism that didn't necessarily jive with what this hockey culture of you assimilate and you don't step out of your lane and you just go there and you play the game and shut up and dribble for all intents and purposes.
If I would have been there, I would have nudged you. And you are a sarcastic, funny guy. So I'm sure it probably occurred to you maybe to say to Peter Chiarelli, hey, Peter, you know what? Let's worry about winning the Stanley Cup. If that occasion should arise, why don't we just go for making the playoffs? How about that? Because,
Yeah. I mean, and this is a bit of a spoiler alert, but I got waived and sent down to the Bakersfield Condors that year. So Is that the only reason? I mean, my numbers weren't great. We had a bad year the year before. Cam Talbot's obviously a great goalie. They brought him in. Anders Nilsson's still in the NHL. So I'm certainly not using this as oh, poor me, look at what happened. I'm using it to illustrate what hockey culture is and some concrete examples of explicitly it being held against you to step out and to use your voice in a way that's not what the norm is, not what the group is.
So, Mark, this opens up the door to this question, which is, if you were playing in the NHL now, I know you got back from Germany, so you're still an active player. I don't want to make that mistake and say, well, when you retired, because you have not retired officially as of yet. But if you were in the NHL and you were going back to play in the situation that we're now facing, would you use your platform at this point to try and share your vision of the United States, of policing, of police brutality, of racism, and all of that? Or would you feel the need to keep quiet?
I would definitely use the platform. The thing that's, the thing that's encouraged me a lot is watching so many other people, including white people, use their platform right now to say things that I've been feeling and the things that we're witnessing right now. The expressions that I'm feeling from watching what we're seeing. I would very much so use my platform to voice my opinions on the things that have happened to me in the past, the culture of hockey in general, and the things that hopefully we'll try to fix moving forward. That being said, I don't think I could honestly do it with the same type of freedom that you would see an NFL or an NBA player do. This is on our front doorstep now, the conversation of racism, the conversation of police brutality, the long list of social injustices that happen to people of color in North America, not exclusive to America, but in North America. However, if I was still in the NHL, I would still be tentative to blast away perhaps in the same way I would want to. And even with this all happening now and everyone being so courageous and willing to speak up against it, I still would have a slight bit of tentativeness, because I wouldn't want to burn that bridge. I wouldn't want to be like too much of what they're not used to. I wouldn't want to say too many things to ruffle feathers. I mean, that's ridiculous. But to answer your question quite candidly, I would use my platform and I would say everything that I'm currently saying now, but to really go 100% in, I think I would honestly still be tentative to do so because of potential backlash, because like Ben said, his experiences weren't through race, but he was questioned by his GM. Are you going to be, am I going to have another troubling case with my goalie again? And all he was trying to do was bring mental health and pride to the awareness of the hockey community. So when you're operating with those types of restrictions, I think you have to be somewhat cautious until all the players and a lot of the white players just say, screw that. We don't need to be cautious anymore, because these are real life matters and real life issues. And if the people above us can't handle that, then so be it. Because they're not going to fire Sidney Crosby, but they could easily fire Ben or I.
That's a great point. And it's, to me, Ben, if you and Mark are playing together and you have the locker beside him and you're doing interviews, and as a white man in that situation, if you go really as emotionally strong and as passionate as you want to be, that would perhaps open the door for Mark to do the same thing, because you wouldn't see the same contrast. You wouldn't see, the black guy on the team speaking in a certain way and all the white guys kind of hiding from the issue.
Yes. And I really think it's important. And this is the dilemma that you come down to is it my place as a white person to speak for Mark? Or is it my place to step back and listen and support Mark? But as we are hearing Mark say, if he's the only one to do it, like there almost has to be communication outside of the camera lens, like a plan of action, right? I mean, we get handed talking points by the media managers on every team, right? So that it's a uniform message that's coming out from the locker room and blah, blah, blah. So it would almost have to come from that. And if Mark requested that I come first, then more than happy to do that. But you have to be really cautious about it, because I mean, this is the sticky area of becoming an ally is I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to say something wrong. I'm going to use the wrong vernacular. I'm going to mess up. And how do I respond when I do mess up is a really telling thing, right? Do I get defensive? If I say something racist, whether or not I mean it, do I own it or do I diminish it? Do I acknowledge my actions and the unintended consequences, or do I kind of like, no, I did what I was told one time, and now I'm like stringent on that, even though I have somebody who's trying to correct my behaviors right in front of me, right? So I really think that, yes, I would be there to support him, and what it would be to me, what it would look like in an allyship role there is having a conversation with Mark. If Mark wants us to have this conversation and bring that spotlight on him, because let's be honest, they're going to use a 2-second soundbite from me, and they're going to use 2 minutes of audio from Mark.
Yeah, let's actually, I was just thinking that we should probably just drop Mark's microphone now, because, nobody really cares what he's got to say. It's all about what the white guy says. And, I'm just, I don't know. I have felt this sick feeling now since George Floyd was murdered by a police officer. And I don't know. I thought the worst thing about it was, obviously, the fact that he's dead, but the fact that the cop knew that there were people that were recording this, right? That there was phones all over the place, and he felt so protected by the law that he could murder a guy, not do anything to try to save him after he was unconscious, and not worry, okay, what's going to happen in my life? And that, to me, is extremely disturbing.
That's one of the most disheartening things about it is almost in just the casual calmness that the officer was, with his hands in his pockets even, was applying the pressure to his throat to cut off his air supply, to cut off George Floyd's air supply. That's one of the most disturbing things about it. But to your point exactly, why was the officer therefore so relaxed and calm and felt secure, knowingly that there's multiple cell phones turned around and filming him? And because he felt probably protected by the law, which to me, just, if that doesn't highlight the level of excessive force and corruption that some certain police officers can practice, and most certainly practice on the Black community daily, they feel like they're above the law. In society, we all sign a contract that, we're not going to hurt each other. We're not going to steal from one another. We're not going to, commit certain obvious crimes. But when one party in the contract breaks that contractual agreement, what makes that other party feel secure whatsoever in this agreement now? And that's sort of like where it is. And that's the real scary thing for a lot of Black people in America and in North America is that, imagine the fear you can have walking out of your own home, where that the people who are supposed to uphold the law and protect and serve are willing to break the law while it's being documented, and they seamlessly don't even really truly react. How are you ever, that's true oppression. How are you ever supposed to combat that? How are you ever supposed to get ahead when and on top of that, there's already built-in preconceived notions that I might be a danger to them, or for that same reason we said before, of just the culture or society not understanding who I am. But in reality, if it were me, the cop would probably be in a lot of crap because, my father, again, is a judge. But they don't know that, and they can operate with such minimal practice of the law is one of, again, agreeing with you, is one of the most disturbing parts of witnessing that there was no, and then between all four of the officers, to be honest, that none of them seemed to care that this was being documented, and that the body went still, and that they remained holding their positions of force. It was, I don't even know how to describe the pain that it's felt internally when you see someone who looks like you suffer like that.
And if you were to, and you sort of brought something to my attention that, the talking points that you're given. Would you get a talking point now from the PR department of a National Hockey League team? Let's say that you were playing and that the team was still playing, that there was no pandemic, or when they go back. Would you be talked to, do you think, by the team in some way to say, okay, here are the boundaries as to what we would like you not to say or to say?
That's a difficult question to answer. Because I'm removed from the game and removed from those locker rooms now. I also think it really goes team to team, right? It depends on the leadership, not just on the players, but the coaches, right? If you're in Anaheim and you have Dallas Eakins, that Mark and I both attest to, I imagine that you're having fairly robust conversations about it. And the response from the team is going to be more understanding and inclusive than if you were, choose some of the teams that put out
I got one
boilerplate stuff for responses this week, right?
I got a team for you, Columbus, because last time when Colin Kaepernick knelt down and that became an issue, and then different people in different sports embraced it, John Tortorella said, if one of my players does that, I'll boot him off the bench. I'm not sure how he phrased it, but that's how he put it, which upon further review doesn't stand the test of time very well.
No, and I mean, that's the problem with these knee-jerk reactions, right? You have one of the issues that we as white people are taught by society is that our opinion matters. And I know for a fact that I have had my opinion validated, whether or not at the time that I was speaking out about mental health and mental illness, I hadn't had any training. I wasn't a social worker at that time. I didn't know deep enough what to say, to truly bring all context into play, into a discussion, right? But my opinion was validated in a way that that's a microcosm. But if you look at the way that I am treated as a society, if you look at the way I'm treated in society as a whole, my opinion and the things that I do are continually validated and said, that's okay. That's okay. The amount of speeding tickets that I've gotten out of, I need more than one hand to count that, right? That I got a warning. Oh, don't worry about it. Slow it down next time, right? That's validating that I can speed. I can break some laws. I don't have to take that seriously, right? Those are the more insidious messages that we get as white people that we then pass on as bias into our interactions with other people, right? It is really insidious in the messaging that we are taught as white people. And it's really difficult to break out of that cycle, to realize that, hey, I don't know what I'm talking about, because you're going against something I know to be true, that my opinion is important on this,
Mark, have you, this isn't reflective of anything, but just my interest, which is, have you gotten out of speeding tickets?
No. No, I haven't had one in a while, but the best I've ever got is a reduced speeding ticket, but still a ticket.
Yeah, it's that's just a great example, a great illustration, Ben, of the difference between how you're perceived and what you can get away with. Mark, if do you think any NHLer, when hockey comes back, assuming that the culture remains the way it is with active protests all over the place, which we hope, I hope that this goes right to November the 3rd, which would be, the next election in the United States. You think any hockey player would take a knee, would kneel down during the national anthem? And if so, what, if any, repercussions do you think there'd be?
I truly can't even fathom the repercussions when it comes to the hockey. I think it would be ugly, to be honest, unless it was done in a manner where so many players were committed to it that a management or a team couldn't, or the league perhaps, it wouldn't look good to hand out that many, that much punishment to that many different people. But I don't know, hockey's a tough one because, there's clearly some guys who are stepping up and are willing to unify with the cause right now. But I don't typically see hockey as an environment where kneeling is going to be tolerated, to be honest. And although what Kaepernick was trying to do with kneeling and bring attention to social injustices and police brutality in America, and although it had nothing to do with the flag or the military or anything like that, I don't know that the hockey world can adapt the same type of gesture, but at the same time, where things have now gotten and how Cap has more or less been proven right in the past 8, 9, or 10 days, so right that the manner of which George Floyd died was an eerie comparison between the two. I think it's almost, I don't know how many athletes will continue to do that, but I can imagine in the other sports, they'd probably be like, well, this is an example of why we need to do it more. If platforms were set by other athletes of color and other leagues, then perhaps slowly the hockey community will start to respond like that. Black players may start to do the same thing. They may have these team discussions, as Ben mentioned. It's going to be different team to team. But I don't know. I'm skeptic to think that the hockey community will truly unify in that way. To be honest, I'm terrified that by the time hockey does resume in the fall, whenever that may be, that this won't just be a forgotten matter.
Yeah. Ben, I gotta believe that you must have thought about kneeling. I don't mean necessarily you doing it, but yeah, you were playing, when Colin Kaepernick took a knee and other players on his team joined him, and then it became a huge issue. Do I want to stand there for the national anthem? And guys actually remained back in the tunnel, so they weren't forced to choose one way or the other. You must have thought of it.
I did think of it. I considered it. But you also have to think of, there's I'll preface it by saying I regret it. I wish I would have done it, but it's also really important to, and I think as someone who tries to be an ally, and listening to Mark's response was, is the activism that you are doing, is me kneeling in 2014 after the Ferguson protests, does that do something for me? Is that turning me into a martyr for a cause that isn't mine? Am I doing something that's actually promoting the efforts of the community I'm trying to help? Or does me as a white person in Edmonton, Alberta, with no players of color on my team at that moment, does that shine a negative light on the black players in the league, saying, well, Ben did it, why can't you do it? At the same time as you have comments like John Tortorella, who's coming out saying, I'm going to bench anybody who does this, right? You had things in Hockey USA, it was fairly resounding, the pressure to capitulate and to fall into line, right? And I weighed it, and I weighed a decision to not do it, and I would say that I regret it, but it also has helped formulate my advocacy going forward, and it helped me in my allyship today, right? It was a learning experience. Whether it was a mistake, I can regret it, but it was also formative in helping me to conceptualize things going forward.
Yeah, your explanation of the ramifications of it, I would never have thought of. Your head must be a really busy place, man. If you had all of that, kind of figured out, if I take a knee, the obvious thing is that you're making a statement in support of people, right? I don't see it as, one community supporting another community. There is a big picture here, which is, we're all part of the same community. And part of the problem is that we see Mark, you and I, people like you and I, people who look like you and I, see him as being different. And that fundamentally, Mark, I think that's flawed. And, my upbringing, I would never have thought to myself, when you played for the Leafs, honestly say I didn't know you were black. I mean, granted, you know you're not the blackest guy on the planet, but I never thought about it, and I think that's where we need to get to. Would you agree?
100%. That's where we need to get to, but at the same time, it's a weird thing because obviously, in just saying we shouldn't, you know, as a race, as a human race, we shouldn't see color, obviously. But the unfortunate situation is racism is always going to be a thing. Like it's never going to. It's like the war on drugs. Do you ever win the war on drugs? I mean, I don't know. There's always going to be a drug industry.
I think, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, you win the war on drugs by throwing every black person in prison and putting them there for an extended period of time. I mean, Ronald Reagan had it figured out.
Yeah, exactly. Don't get me started down that'll be a real rabbit hole. But yeah, so there's always going to be racism is the point. So as long as that's always going to exist, I think we do in a way need to see color as far as like the understanding and the education now, and understanding that I am a biracial guy and you guys aren't. You don't need to see that in a negative sense, though. You can see that in a way that like, but we should consider and at least understand that we don't look at Mark that way, but other people are. So if this meeting were to wrap up and we were all happened to be in the same city and we all went for lunch somewhere or dinner or whatever, you guys would still have to understand that we don't look at Mark as different, but people who are sitting at different tables or people who are perhaps serving us might look at Mark as different. So there has to always still be like, not that there has to be, but as long as racism's around, I don't know that it's so easy to just be like, we shouldn't see color, because if you don't see color, then you're back to assuming that there's a group of people that aren't oppressed. You're back to assuming that, you know, certain refugees won't have it difficult, or a brown person or a black person will have the same types of liberties and rights that you do. And that's just not the case. So we want to get there, but we can't just get there by like shutting things off. What would be great is, as a human race, if we only saw, you know, if we saw just like heat sensors and everyone was just red or green, you know what I mean? And you wouldn't realize, no one would ever walk up to me then and treat me differently, because all they would see is what's on the inside. But that's just simply not the case.
For sure. I mean, it's something to strive for without a doubt. You know, I'm a lot older than you guys. So when I say it's unlikely that we'll get to that point in my life, obviously, you know, we have different time periods, but I don't think it's going to happen in your lives either. I wanted to ask you, Ben, I interviewed you on Remembrance Day one time, and I was trying to remember your association with Remembrance Day and veterans. Who was it that fought?
Before I answer that, if I can add one more talking point to what I have learned about as a white person saying, "Oh, I don't see color. I'm colorblind. I don't care if you're," and they list off the rainbow that they don't see. To put it in a Canadian context, if we are to say that about Indigenous Canadians, we are purposely, or maybe not purposely, but there is a distinct erasure of the history of Indigenous people in Canada. The residential schools, basically the entire document that the Canadian government put out that took accountability for the way that we treated Indigenous people. And so for us to say as white people, I don't see color, we are now blinding ourselves to the way that they were treated for hundreds and hundreds of years. And that intergenerational trauma that is perpetuated throughout is now erased in the same manner. So you have issues that are specific to a cultural group that you can ignore and say, well, just get over it, because you don't see the history, because I don't see color, because I've erased that accountability from myself as a white person. So again, I'm parroting things that I have learned that people have taught me, not to step on your toes, Mark, or anything like that. But
no, trust me, I appreciate you adding that detail, because again, like what Michael said, it's, you know, when you watched me play with the Leafs the first time, you might not have realized that I was black. And obviously I'm not not Wesley Snipes, but you know, I'm biracial, so it is with them. But you know who did see that I was black was the cop on Queen Street who profiled me in my SUV, you know, as a Maple Leaf. So it's just something that, you know, you might not have noticed it, but even at the height of my career as an athlete in the NHL with a massive organization like the Leafs behind me, I could still drive home with a member of the team, with a staff member of the team in my car. And he's the one who looks at me and said, "Did you just see how they just looked at you?" And I said, "Welcome to my life." You know, so it's unfortunately, it's just not as no pun intended, but it's just not as so black and white.
So Ben, I asked you that question about veterans in your family for a reason. So was it, did you have an emotional attachment to Remembrance Day?
So my grandfather fought in the Second World War. His father fought in the First World War. So there is a history of service.
Right.
I wouldn't by any means call myself a military like family. We don't have like a direct lineage.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
So here's my question. If I was to, if the three of us were to, as Mark said, we go out and, we go out for dinner, and I don't know the setting that this would happen, but let's say you guys came to my house for dinner and I said, and this is true, my greatest interest in the world outside of the things that, like sports, which is obviously how I make my living, and mental health, would be World War II. And if I said, I want to show you something, and I put on a documentary about the Holocaust, do you think that you would see the pain, the tragedy of that in a different way than I would? I'm Jewish, but I want to know if you think that you would see it differently, if you would be less bothered by it, less affected by it.
I don't. I think we would. I would still be affected by it. One of the best things I did for playing in Europe is going to visit Auschwitz and going to the location and seeing still what they have in the magnitude of shoes and glasses and jewelry and suitcases and even hair still. And when you truly get to see the numbers of the millions that died, that were executed, you can't be a human and not feel something in that moment. And it's very educational, and it's something I truly think everyone should do if they ever have the opportunities to do. So I would 100%, it would resonate with me on a human level. But because I believe if you had the Jewish upbringing of any sort, any kind of historical lesson, any kind of knowledge on perhaps what your parents or grandparents may have had to endure, if there's any type of pain that is known to you and your specific relatives, you would associate with the Holocaust or with, Schindler's List or whatever on a far different level than I would. And that's just me speaking from trying to explain the pain of what I watch happening to Black people in America. I've been a victim of racism, every Black person has. But the deep, assaulting, oppression, whether that be systematic or physical abuse that is taken out on people who look like me, who are completely innocent, I can't truly express. And I've tried to some friends the last few days, the emotion that is inside. It's after I've explained it as sadness, anger, fear, madness, it really just ends up being this feeling of defeat, deflation. It's somehow, I don't know what the word is, but it's an inhumane feeling where I'm witnessing my people, not just a people, but my people, my tribe, my whatever it may be, my people being treated as less than human. Whoever is persecuting them is so clearly showing that their lives are so insignificant that they are nothing. And in that sense, I feel like it would resonate. We would all have it, on some humane level, it would touch us all. But if it was geared towards the Holocaust, I would have to believe, based on my own experiences in the Black community, that the way it would touch you because of your past and your heritage would be different, because it would reach an area where I just couldn't really comprehend, because my grandparents didn't share stories of the Holocaust or whatever with me at the dinner table. But perhaps that happened to you.
I asked that question, and I'm intrigued by the answer that Ben's going to give, because nobody in my family was in Eastern Europe at that time. So I literally don't think I know a single person. My wife's family, yes, but I don't know, a single person in my family going back in time that would have been affected by the Holocaust. So in a lot of ways, Ben, if you and I went to Auschwitz together, that we would have the same history with the horrible things that went on there. We would have the same history, which is just as a human race. So I would kind of expect that you would feel it the same way I would feel it.
I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I was really interested to hear Mark's perspective there, because my assumption coming into it was that there would be some sort of anchoring, like we have the histories of our people are somewhat linked in this tragedy, in this oppression. And for me, as a white person who's as Anglo-Saxon as you get, I don't truly have an anchor to tie that to in myself, right? I don't have that. It doesn't pull at a string in the same way. And for me, I've been to Rwanda. I've been to Cambodia. I've been to Germany. Again, speaking to my privilege of being able to travel all over the world to see these places. But I've been to 3 genocide sites. And in each one of them, there was an overwhelming, it was heavy. Like it like pulls on the middle of your body. It's heavy, but it also isn't anchored in me in the same way as I would have expected. So I was really interested to hear Mark's perspective on that. But yeah, it's easier to dissipate because it isn't anchored in a personal history of mine, I think is the best answer that I would have.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good answer, Scrivy, because that's part of I guess what I was trying to explain. And like Michael, you said you didn't have perhaps a family member, a direct family member who may have been affected by the Holocaust, but I would assume the same way I react to things that happen now with the Black community, I would assume that, even if it was a time where they were perhaps already safely in living in Canada, that's still, they're witnessing such travesty happening to they're knowing that if I'm over there, I'm not safe. But if, our neighbors over there, they could be safe. And so despite your family perhaps not having a direct link to it, just the fact that it was your people who were the ones being persecuted for no reason other than your tribe, your religious beliefs, then I feel like I feel like it's almost impossible to not have some added, like Ben used the analogy of the anchoring type of emotion, because it's almost like your DNA will start, that part of you will start to come out and be like, wow, these are my people. That doesn't, like, if I was born in a different time, that would have been you.
Right. These are all great points, and I would love to continue to debate this. Well, it's not like we're taking sides on this, but I think it's really important. I wanted to throw out the Jewish question because white people, it's very easy for them to talk about how they perceive the Black community and things that unfairly the Black community has to experience. And I kind of wanted to feel what it was like on personal terms. So I'll only say this, that if the 3 of us went to Auschwitz together, it is possible that we would all be on a scale of being horrified, a 10 out of 10. And that at a certain level or in a certain area of our brain, we would all feel identical. At least that's what I hope would happen. This was great, guys. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts and your candor. And, the fact that I was feeling pretty shitty before about my hair. And when Ben took off his hat, all of a sudden now I'm going, hey, it's not so bad.
The only thing that I'm unhappy about is you showed my staring at the camera clip and you made Mark look so good.
Hey, we have, as white people, we have like thousands of years to make up for it to Mark. So I feel like I did my little part there to even things up. What was the staring at the camera thing? What was that?
That was me being bored on the bench a little bit. I was talking with the trainers, and 'cause in LA they always do the interview right in front of that end of the bench, and Stoli was right in front. And I, just on a whim, I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna."
Yeah.
I told the equipment guy, "Hey, I'm gonna stare at the camera the whole time." And the hardest part, it was a minute and a half. It went way longer than I thought it was going to, and trying to keep a straight face. You can see me almost break. You can see me almost break at one point. And I
Yeah, I think you should give us that look, sort of move into the camera now so we can experience it again.
Oh God, that's creepy.
You guys are awesome. Thank you for, in a lot of ways for educating me. And, it's not like it's not like I'm so immature that I think that just talking is going to make all the difference in the world, but without a doubt, talking makes a difference. And I just really appreciate this. And I'd love to do it again. You guys are, well, I shouldn't speak to you as a group. You are individuals. Ben, you're obviously, highly educated in sociology. I'm just guessing. Am I right?
I'm just naturally like a smart human being, right, Mark?
Yeah, he just reads a lot. That's all. He's got a library card. That's it.
That is
2 + 2 is 4, no matter where you learn it.
Well, no, that's not true, because my son, when he was in grade 1 or 2, had a math test, and the first question was 2 + 7 = 7 was his answer, and we still laugh about that to this day because he turned out okay. Hey guys, thank you very much. I really value the last hour. Holy smokes. The last hour that we spent together. And I feel like now I know more than I did an hour ago, which is a good thing.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, really grateful for having us on this platform to just share. It's awesome. So thank you.
Yeah. And Ben, by the way, you keep saying us. Like, are you guys a couple? I just,
Yeah.
Well, you have to understand, this is a defenseman goalie relationship. So,
right.
There very much is a partner, like a deep partnership there.
One of these
years,
I'm
a defensive defenseman, so I wasn't really leaving like my zone that often.
I was the only player on the team that Mark could outskate, I think, maybe.
Yeah.
one of these years, I'm going to make it onto Mark's Christmas sweater. One of these years, I know.
Yeah. My notorious Christmas sweaters. That's true.
I would like to see that sometime. Thanks, guys. Hold on, because I want to chat with you as soon as we're done. Isolation Nation tomorrow. This will be really cool. And I guess we're going back to Edmonton. Jamie Saleh was on this show a couple of weeks ago and was just so open and raw and candid and emotional about growing up with a mama who suffered from severe depression and how she had to be the caregiver. So she's going to come on tomorrow with her mom, which I'm looking forward to immensely, because I think that I will, as I did today, learn something, that I will leave the show better, stronger, more educated than when I started. So that's tomorrow on the show. Make sure you're watching, guys. We'll see you tomorrow on Isolation Nation.